let's start. Firstly, I want to say that I'm really, really happy to see you here, and I'm really happy to welcome you at the project Stravinsky.online Dialogues. And before I will start to introduce you, let me ask you one very brief question. What did you do today, right before our meeting, just to understand the point of reality where I find you at the moment? I mean, what did you do today?
Today, well, I had a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we were talking about the possibility of extending our campus, actually. It was quite a political thing. And so with buildings and stuff like that, you know, we never have enough room on space and stuff like that. And then I had another meeting with Svetlana, my new colleague. And I had something to eat in between. And just now, before this, I mean, for us now, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon over here. I was just briefly at home to eat something and to write a few emails, and then went to this space here and just got, you know, things running and ready for the interview.
Yeah. And probably after this meeting, you will have another meeting. Or the last
hopefully not. No. I'll go back home probably and go to sleep or something like that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, thank you for coming. And today I would like to introduce you as head of electronic studio in Basel of Basel Music Academy, and also as a professor and improviser and software maker and sound designer and many, many other things you are doing. Please tell you, how do you define yourself?
Depends on who I talk to. But I mean, you summed it up professionally. I would say I would call myself a musician, electronic improviser, programmer, and occasionally also as a composer, depending on the context. And then on the other side, I'm a lecturer for a very long time already. So this is probably my main profession. And the other stuff that I do resolves around that.
Oh, yeah, cool. Thank you. You remember that I had been studying in Basel Music Academy about 10 years ago. And when I had been studying, you were leading audio design program. And now you are the head of an electroacoustic studio. And there are some changes happens during this time while Eric Onio was a leader of this electronic studio. And we were talking with you that he was quite a unique person who was combined in himself both composition and electronic. And you follow this in your studio. Tell us a little bit about these changes happens from the moment that Eric left.
Yeah, so this was basically 2 years ago. And no, it's 3 years ago already.
Yeah, it was 3 years. No, 2 years ago. 19.
Time runs, and yeah, Eric got ill, and I was in charge from that on. Right now, I have to correct you. I'm not the only head of the studio. We have a co-leading situation right now. My new partner in the studio is Svetlana Marash. She started now in September. So we are 2 people now running the studio, basically. Things changed a little, that is true. Eric was clearly a very unique person. He was able to teach a lot of different subjects. He was able to give lectures on very different things and advise people on many things. He was technically well-versed. He was musically super well-versed. He was a great composer, and he was a very sought-after lecturer. And all this made him so unique in this position. It's always difficult if somebody who has such a big influence on an institution is not there anymore, and you have to decide how to continue. And we had a lot of talk with our colleagues also, what would be their expectations for the studio to develop into. And finally, we found that it was not the idea to find an exact or kind of exact replacement for him, but it was time to go slightly different paths. And then we started to look out for people, and there was an application round where people could introduce themselves. And finally, we found Svetlana Marash, who is now my new colleague, as I said. And there are a couple of differences now, of course. She's a composer, but she's mostly a composer of electronic music, and also a performer, an improviser. And this part was not what Eric was doing. Eric was also very much interested in instrumental composition and all that. And we had always a situation of composition and audio design at the same school, in the same department. And as things go on, I would say that the line between the two classes in the last years already started blurring a lot. So it's not as clear as it was, like, for example, 15 years ago or something like that, that you had somebody who was clearly just doing audio design or whatever you think that it might be, and then somebody just doing composition. Nowadays, I think the two fields, they overlap very strongly, and it was not our idea to continue to have two different classes, basically. So in our school now, we have still composition classes with composition professors, and they are doing mostly instrumental composition. But in the electronic studio itself, there's not a dedicated, separate class for electronic composition anymore. But I think we have extended our team a little bit, the things that we can provide through Svetlana also, and we open it up a little bit for the other classes also to take part in the courses that we offer and these things. So mainly it's now one slightly larger class with audio design, but as I said, the subjects, they overlap a lot. And I would say quite a lot of our students regard themselves as being composers or producers just as well as the others.
Yeah. And how do you decide this problem of collaboration? I mean, when a person who is very well educated in traditional compositions come to you, still, if for him there is, or for her there is a chance to be deeply involved into this electronic stuff, like to combine with its own practice. Am I correct? Yeah. That this is the question for me about how do you construct your classes? For example, because you have a lot. I mean, somebody can be very good in programming software. Somebody can be very good in making instruments. Somebody can be very good in improvisation, performance, or whatever. Somebody can be very good in composition. How do you decide this problem of the main subject of the person? And then to share with the other fields, like going deep into one subject, or maybe trying this, and then to decide how it's possible to combine in an individual project.
Difficult question. I would say we regard people coming to us, students, as being individuals, just as everybody else. So it's not the person studying audio design or the person studying composition. As I said, I think a lot of these subjects and fields, they overlap. Of course, we have a curriculum that the normal audio design students have to go through, bachelor and master. But on top of that, there are different ways of people from the other classes improvisers or composers, as you said, can take part in the activities at the studio. There's one thing for the composers; they can have classes with their main professor, but then they can pick other professors from other departments to take classes just as well. They have to organize that. So somebody from the composition class can say, okay, for the next 2 semesters, I want to have an emphasis in electronic music and I need some tutorship or something like that. And then they can inscribe through that. And on top of that, there is the possibility of we offer some open courses, introductory courses mostly, where all other students from other classes can take part in. So there are introductions into electronic music, introductions in recording, there are introductions also in live electronics, things like that. And a lot of people take these courses. And this is also a way of, well, on the one side of opening up the studio to the rest of the school, and for us, again, to meet those people, to learn to know them, and to make collaborations happening with our students. So this is mostly, if you don't know people, then there's no collaboration. But if people meet and sit together in a class, then it's much easier. I think I answered your question, but I'm not sure.
Yes. You answered my question because, it was about it was also the question how the students collaborate with each other. How do they find each other? Because it's really like a moment of sharing interests at the one studio, at the one platform, at the one field. Yeah, that's really important. May I ask you personally, how did you enter the world of electronic? Where and how did you start it? And how did you trust the electronic? Because I know usually my question is, how many troubles did you have with electronic? When did you start? Because it's really like you need sometimes to trust technology, that it doesn't let you down. Because not so many time ago, I had problems with scenes. And my colleague had a big premiere with a big festival and a big image event. And then she had a big orchestra piece with a tape music. And at the moment at the premiere, everything was collapsed and everything. And so it was like, you can't trust the technology. How did you enter? How do you still trust it?
Okay, sounds almost desperate now. So when I started, I mean, this was some time ago, I would say beginning of the 90s. Now, mid-90s is where I first started doing electronics, actually. And I was a student at just a regular classical music school. And I was interested in piano playing. I wanted to be a piano player, basically. And I was completely enthusiastic, but I noticed, well, okay, there are other people playing piano and they are really good, and then when I entered school, I noticed, okay, there are other things next to piano playing that interest me, like music theory, for example. Counterpoint was super interesting for me, and I was always interested in the music of my time. So I was very interested in what kind of music people do today. What kind of music composers write today. And I was growing up in Freiburg in Germany. It's not far from Basel here. And I was quite lucky because there were a couple of very good ensembles for contemporary music there. And I was able to visit concerts and see what they're doing. And I was captivated by that. And then I started composing myself. In school still, and my colleagues play the pieces and stuff like that. And this was not so easy because I noticed that what I wrote down was not what they were playing. And this was, you probably know this problem. This was partly because of me not being able to express myself clearly with a score and stuff like that. And of course, other problems and stuff like that. So I finally found electronics to be one way out to really be very precise about what I want to tell or what I want to sound, right? Mm-hmm. Because with electronics, you are very close to the final result. There is not necessarily somebody still interpreting your music on their instrument, but if you're working on a tape piece, for example, you're really designing the sound of the final result.
I don't think that you trust technology more than people.
No, not at all. I mean, the aspect of somebody interpreting your music is a wonderful thing, of course. But for me at that time was the problem that I couldn't do it. I couldn't express myself through just scores. And I was really fascinated by electronic sounds at that time. I mean, I knew about stuff like Jean-Michel Jarre and stuff like that, but that was not interesting for me. I was interested in the new kind of sounds. And there was a little electronic studio in the place where I studied, and I had access to that. Now, coming to your question of trust and stuff like that, when I entered this studio, it was a composer's studio, basically. So there were people there doing interesting stuff, having interesting thoughts about music, but their technological knowledge about the processes was not that high. So I had the impression that the ideas were interesting, but everybody was kind of finding their way around the technology. And somehow this doesn't really work for me. So if I see a mixer in front of me, I try all the knobs till I understand what's going on, or I read the manual and stuff like that. And pretty soon I was kind of getting a tutor in that studio, me being not a composer by default, but had an easier access to technology, maybe, I don't know. And I found myself in helping out the others how things work. But I wanted to be a composer still at that time, and I had to decide for myself, if I want to compose with electronics, I knew that I had to learn electronics from ground up. That was a very clear idea for me. So before I would be able to really study composition, I would need to learn the instrument. That was my conclusion at that time. And this is when I went to Basel, actually, to study there. And I mean, technologically, it was a completely different time. Situation was, as students, we didn't have everything as people have nowadays. I didn't even have a laptop at that time. So we had to always work with other people's gear. And still, I think it's part of the rehearsal process and of the process of building a piece is to work with your equipment and to learn to know it and learn to know its quirks also. And I don't know, maybe I was lucky, but it only really happened once to me that something broke just before a performance. And I was doing the sound reinforcement and live electronics for a contemporary music ensemble in Freiburg for quite some time. And yeah, it happened that my computer broke once for one of these performances. I don't know. I think it's an instrument. The electronic part is an instrument that you have to learn. And it's like having your violin and you exactly know. No, it's not exactly the same thing, but the analogy is maybe not so bad. You know how to treat it, that it performs well for the performance also. And with electronics, I think it's similar. You have to know your gear. It's probably best to always work with your stuff that you own yourself, because then you really can control it, especially a computer, of course. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, as a programmer, I'm also programming musical patches, as you know, music software. I have to have a slightly deeper understanding of a computer, and maybe this helps to prepare it in this way that it works for the performance also. So
yes, we will talk about this later. I will ask you about the instrument and the sound. I have special question for you to talk about this. So this is more the question of the professional confidence, as I see it. Yes, that you are learning the instrument, that you are learning how there are things happens there, and then you're starting to interpret it somehow, and then to get out of this thing. May I ask you about? At your side, there is so huge things about, so one can see the overview of what you are doing, about all your activities. Let me ask you about your collaborative project, firstly, because a lot of them dedicated to your collaboration with Atelier with Sibylla Howard and Daniel Reichmuth. Please correct me if I'm wrong with the names, with the pronunciation. And yes, I was very, very interested in how many things you did for them or together with them. And my first question about the problem of the collaboration, because you see this problem from the, how did you say it, from the special point of the technological point of view, how to solve the problem. My question is, your collaboration with these people happens that you get the problem and then you solve the problem. Or you have the common problems, I mean, like together, and then your solution can influence the really like the how the thing can be. So it really it can change the initial point. Or you just solve the problem. I mean, how this artistic point and technological points are meeting together.
Okay, a good question. But this collaboration with Daniel and Sibyl went for a couple of years, and we did a couple of projects together. And each project was slightly different, I would say. At the beginning, well, Daniel Reichmuth and Sibyl Howard, they are an artistic duo, and they've been doing stuff together before I met them. So I was kind of the third person coming in there. And the first project was clearly just like an application. You know, they had a problem they wanted to have solved, just as you described it. And I wrote some software for them so they could perform their artistic idea. And this went very well and was quite enjoyable for me too. So the next projects, I was in there from the first run, from the first idea already. And this changed, of course, the whole situation a lot. In this trio, let's put it like that, all of us have their special fields, right? For example, Daniel is very good with hardware electronics and building stuff. Sibyl is doing a lot of the text work involved in this stuff and developing artistic ideas and also fundraising and this stuff. And my part was mostly doing software and research and working with sensors and stuff like that. And music, if there was music directly in there, sounds, of course. So I would, especially with these interactive installations we did there was a lot of artistic shared work in there. The main basic idea mostly came from Daniel and Sibyl as a couple. They also live together and they talk a lot about it and they come up with these ideas. But the ideas are very fantastic, you know. They're not onto the ground and being realizable just like that. So you have to trim them down. You have to find the heart of the idea and then try to say, okay, how can we realize that with all the whistles and bells? And this was a very interesting collaboration always.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we will talk about a special project. For example, let's talk about Trickster.
Yes.
Could you say, please, who is Trickster?
Trickster is an artificial character. It's a figure. It's a the name goes back to trick. Trickster is somebody who tricks people it is a very old character that also appeared many hundred years ago in literature already, is somebody that plays tricks on you, not completely bad and not completely good, somewhere in between, and likes to play with you. And we often had the idea of impersonating electronics as a character somehow. And Trickster was probably the most direct way to translate that. And it is an electronic creature, if you want to, that you can interact with. And the interaction part was always very important for Daniel and Sibyl. And for Trickster, there's this huge dance floor, that's what they call it. It's a sensor floor where people can step on. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the interaction points. Then the other part is a very even bigger wall out of ancient light bulbs. And it has some kind of 320, I think, Lamps, yeah. I mean, like boxes in there. In each boxes, there are 2 lamps, actually.
Pixels, like
pixels. Analog pixels, that was the idea. So the idea was to somehow combine ancient electronics with very new stuff. Everything worked on a computer. And to have these ancient ideas of artificial intelligence also in there.
That's a very interesting thing, because you are like combining artificial intelligence, but with the very low resolution of the image. So it's really like you don't know the real personality. It's really like beside of this screen. You never know who is hiding there.
It's actually not hiding the thing. It is this. The wall is the person or the character, actually. And it has a voice. So it can also directly address people and talk to them. And also the voice, I mean, it's even at that time, it was not the most high-tech voice thing that we got. We wanted to have something with character, actually. It was not about, our collaborations are never about the technology by itself, the fun to have, the latest thing in there. That was not the
Yes, I felt it, yeah, because it's like they concepted like an audiovisual environment with artificial personality. Yeah, it's exactly. Like you have somebody who has kind of body, but and also it's presented as a human. If it's a trick also with our perception to perceive the machine as a human, still without body but still existing somewhere, or we like to talk with him or with it, and to have answers at least. Yeah, like you have a question and then you want to have an answer. Mm.
Yeah, and it plays with you a little bit, so it gives you the opportunity to get into some kind of exchange. And it's very playful, the idea, but the character, the machine, is actually dictating the rules still. So if you want to get something out of it, you have to somehow play a little bit to the rules. And Trickster sometimes just changes its mood and its mode and switches to another thing. So this is the tricking part of it. It wants to play with you, but it doesn't let you completely understand what's going on. And it's confronting you with all those, also historic questions about computers and intelligence and machines and humans and stuff like that. Yes.
And still, I was talking with Cedric Spindler this summer about artificial intelligence, that we still think that in this artificial intelligence kind of as a human thinking about something, but it's still just a question of the how many datas you put into the artificial intelligence. It's just a question of the datas inside, but not about the character. We still want to get these human ideas upon the technology, upon the machine.
Yeah, these are two things that are related but not the same, I would say. The one thing is the corpus of knowledge of such an artificial intelligence. And the other thing is how it gets into communication with humans, basically. And if you think about newer technology like Apple's Alexa and stuff like that, they have a voice, and this is designed in a way to be human and to be approachable and stuff like that. And this is more what we did. We tried to create a character. I mean, we said it's an artificial intelligence, but technologically it's not at all. We feed it with information, but it's not able to learn, basically. And this is a very important point, which is needed for real artificial intelligence.
And this trickster exists in two modes, yeah? At the mode when nobody talk with it, like it's something happens inside it, like generative mode, you call it. And also this interactive mode when it starts to communicate. It means that it's like, yeah.
Yeah, this had some very practical reasons and also artistic reasons, I would say. The very practical reason is at that time when we built Trickster, we already had the experience that having an interactive installation inside of an exhibition can cause many problems for the space that you're actually doing this in. If you have a lot of these installations and they push all the time with their sound and their images, then you get it's quite distressful with a lot of those machines in the same room. So we always had the idea of, okay, if there's nobody going to interact, then the system is going to sleep somehow, or it's going to be silent in a way. So that was a very practical reason, but also the artistic reason that Trickster is not going to shout at an empty room, for example. So it's sensing if somebody comes in and wants to interact. And then it starts the second mode, this interactive mode. And if nobody's around, it gets mostly quiet. There's only a little sound going on and some blinking lights, and it's doing some kind of self-amusement, I would say. It's amusing itself mostly. So these are the two modes.
And it also produces music. My question is, when somebody is interacting with Trickster, who is producing music? Does the person who is playing producing music, or it's a trickster who is producing sound or music or whatever?
Yeah, that's a common question that comes up with almost all the installations that we did. And I don't know if I can answer it clearly, but you could say, well, the installation or Trickster is doing the music because we designed the system and we designed the possibilities that people have to interact with the system. We designed the sounds that are available. And, well, as I said, the system, how it works.
Yeah.
But on the other side, there is the public invited to interact. And there is not it wouldn't be an interaction if it was just not paying attention to the gesture of the input. So there is some certain kind of control that people that interact with it have on the sounds that actually Trickster does. But to say that people are doing the music themselves is probably also not correct, because you can't do the sounds that you want to do. You can interact with it and you can control them over time to some extent, but it's probably not what everybody would say is like, I'm doing the music. It's more like you are finding the music in there mostly, and through your interaction and mostly through the organization of time in there, you are creating unique output. That's true.
Kind of, you are making your path in this music. You are direct this music, but you are not creating the sound. You can just control a little bit the sound.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and but can we also treat the Trickster as an instrument in this case? I mean, like violin you said about before. Like this is a big instrument? Yeah, and why?
No, I wouldn't call it an instrument. It was not conceived as an instrument. It was conceived as a character that is kind of mysterious and that plays with you a little bit. And if you want to, you can try to find out, you can get into a dialogue But if you're not interested, you can just watch it or move on. And it was not conceived as an instrument at all.
If you could predict the reaction of trickster on a person who are on the stage, if it's predictable or it's not predictable for you, for example, as one of the creators of this
yes, pretty much, yes.
Pretty much.
Sometimes, not always, I would say. Sometimes funny things happen, but mostly I would say yes. That's what I meant. We designed the system. We know very well what Trickster can do and why it's doing some stuff at some times. And this is also the fun part, or the part where we as creators really need to step back at some point and say, okay, now we designed it. Now it's here. Now people come and we really have to observe and not try to tell, you need to do this, and you need to do that. And now it's this going on. Not at all. No, it's really like this thing should talk directly to the people without you trying to mediate or something like that. And this is the interesting part. It's also the difficult part, because you know what's going on. And you might say, okay, why don't you go a little bit over here and do that? Then you would get this result. But the person trying this out doesn't know it. And this is also the interesting part about it. It's a space to explore for people. And it's not about us telling people how to do this. The interesting part that Sibyl and Daniel always had in mind is that these interactive installations are also social situations, social environments. People come together. Almost, I think all of our installations are not one-to-one situations, but always like more people can come together. A few people can directly interact, but everybody is invited to observe and to see and to try them out themselves then. So there was always also the idea of a social meeting point and giving people something to observe and then also to discuss and talk about.
Does it also mean that we are learning with this system, we are learning to communicate with these sounds? I mean, the sounds as a sort of communication without meaning. I mean, like non-verbal communication with each other, without understanding what we are talking about, just like signals and emotions and like this, without actual meaning of the words. Because yes, you can see something which is written on a wall, but usually it doesn't mean that you express yourself with the meaning. You express yourself with the sound, if it's correct. That we are learning to communicate with each other with the sound, not with the meaning.
I'm not exactly sure if I understand what you mean, but...
I mean, the trickster reacts you as a sound. I mean, I can't tell myself something, okay, I want to talk with you. But I start to dance, I start to move, I start to make him react to me. But it's not a reaction of the word of the meaning. It's a reaction of the behaving more than meaning.
Yeah, meaning is very deep, and it's not a direct meaning. It's not a direct information or direct thing that you get out of it. Communication is still very important in this installation, and music or sound is the medium that makes us communicate with it. I mean, it's also the lights. The lights are super strong in this installation. It's huge and it's really bright, and there's a lot of warmth also coming from these light bulbs. So there is energy in the room. But I think what really reaches out to the people is then the sounds that are also triggered with this, and the synchronization with the lights. And communication is not only between one person and the installation, but even more important for us is the communication between several people in the room. And we found some very interesting stuff when doing our installations, Trickster and others, how people behave in these situations is very interesting to us. And how people learn by observing, the situation is like this. This person is now doing something, but I want to now. How do I behave in this situation? Do I just go in there and do my thing and disturb the others, or do I just wait? Do I explain stuff that I have observed and all this? So this social context is, I think, probably even more important than just between you as a visitor and the machine.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I also wanted to ask, when people reacted, did they express their reaction with the sound? And if this sound influenced also something in social character, I mean that machine reading only the behavior, not the sound of a person, or the sound is also influenced something.
You mean the sound that the visitors
sound
do?
Sound of visitors.
Now I understand. No, it's not in there. Let me think. No. Yeah, there is, technical components are this dance floor thing where you can step on, and through your movement on that, you can provoke the machine in a certain way. And then there is also a three-dimensional camera in there with that can sense distance and stuff like that. But there is no microphone or something like that in there, so you can't directly interact with sound. No.
Yeah. For me, it's interesting also. I have an impression if the machine is observing what happens with people. I mean, it's like more the experiment of really like somebody hiding in the machine and looking what's happening there. How do they really behave to provoke me to do something? I mean, as a character, did you find yourself thinking as if you are a trickster after this experiment, after this installation?
But while designing, of course, you step somehow into this character, because you're thinking of ways of interaction and ways of what might be interesting to confront people with. So yes, there was a certain time when we felt a bit like being this character, but in the end, no, because it became a thing by itself, which consists of many different things. It's not just the work of me or of Daniel or of Sybil. It's the community thing, and we all put our ideas into this, and it really had then its own kind of personality, even for us, because sometimes this is you mentioned it before with technology. You sometimes don't know exactly what happens, and if you build something like this system that should behave or should seem to behave independently, if you succeed, then it surprises you also to some extent. And this happens sometimes, yes.
Yeah, that's truly. And you have also other projects with machines. And could you answer, please, for you, if machine it's fiction or it's reality?
A machine.
Or machine. For example, in a project Vocal, you are also talking with the machine, and you have some questions, and you kind of also trying to collaborate with it and to think how the machine is thinking, and the machine is asking you, how do you think? Am I thinking or not? Or whatever. What is this for you? I mean, the machine, how do you estimate what the machine is itself? If it's reality, or if it's media, or if it's a fiction?
I wouldn't say it's fiction, certainly not. The word machine probably goes back to something mechanical, and mechanical things, they are part of our real physical world. But nowadays, of course, we moved on, and most of our, well, not most, but a lot of our lives is digital already. And there is no body anymore, no mechanics, there is still physics involved, but software and the interaction with software is not something from the physical world, basically. So the old idea of a machine is is not the same anymore. It shifted clearly. And with artificial intelligence, it even goes further because, of course, we had very early on, we wanted to have machines that are intelligent in some way. But it was always like predefined what a machine could do. We had to think, as in designers, we had to think about, okay, what are the limits of that thing? What do I want to achieve? What are the situations that the machine must handle by itself, maybe even? And nowadays it went further that with artificial intelligence, now the learning comes into play. So the designer doesn't really design the borders of that, the limits, but the limits are basically endless if the machine is able to collect data itself and can make decisions from this. Yeah. Exact, yeah. So that's a big difference. And here I would say it's not fiction; it's still reality. You know, it's this is happening, and it can have a huge impact on a lot of our lives. And so I wouldn't say it's fiction at all, but it's not like material world anymore.
Yeah. My question about the instrument. After these experiments with the artificial intelligence, do you still treat instrument as a device, or also it's a kind of machine for you? Making an instrument intelligence. Do you think about this at your electronical improvisation or whatever? Do you apply this thinking into this process, being instrument intelligence?
Yeah, to some extent. I started very early on that because I felt the need as an improviser to have to design an instrument, if you want to, that can confront me with stuff that I didn't choose. So that's the first step. I mean, this is not a new idea. Other people had that picture way before me. So having like situations where you're surprised, where the machine or the instrument, whatever you want to call it, makes decisions by itself and delivers stuff by itself. And I always find that idea super interesting. And the big difference with the instrument that I'm improvising today than, for example, the piano that I started out with is that I don't create every single note myself, but I have more like a partner in there that contributes to the whole process. So I can start a process in the background, for example, or in my current setup, I use microphones and I use an electric guitar and stuff like that. So there are still some kind of hands-on instruments in there, but I feed this to the big instrument, and the instrument does some process on that and gives it back to me. And I don't know exactly what it is, but I designed the process that is applied to this thing. And this, I think, is very interesting. Also that with electronics, you often have the situation that you are not working on a single layer, but you have the possibility of having several layers on top of each other and setting something in motion that continues after following a certain algorithm or a certain behavior. And designing these kind of behaviors is very interesting for me as a musician. And this is where I would say it is an instrument, but it's not an instrument like a traditional instrument.
Yes, of course. My question is not about traditional instrument. My question is about how do you treat the tables, the preparing scenes to let something happens in this situation, for example. Let's keep this question of instrument. I wanted to ask you about this interface, because your SoundCloud account has kind of name of geplante obsolescence. Sorry to pronounce it like this, but it's also like, do you think about yourself as an interface as well when you're presented in a virtual sealed in a virtual, in a digital area, or you are a kind of human? How do you treat yourself when you are in this special digital area?
Yeah, well, that's quite individual, I would say. When I first started this SoundCloud thing, it was more the idea of being unrecognized and being not the person I am, but something or somebody, and just throwing music on there. And the name actually, geplante Obsoleszenz, means that there is something planned and to be obsolete.
Yes, I like it very much. This is like a machine which require being new the next year, because it's already like it's old. It's very, very, very fast old.
That's true, but it has also a very negative connotation, actually. It is a term that describes built-in faults of something. So it breaks at some time, so it gets obsolete, so you can buy something new.
Okay.
It has a kind of mixed meaning to it, but I still thought that was kind of true for me at that time, or maybe even still. It's not doing music for eternity. It's doing music for the moment. For the moment it works, and at some point it might not work anymore. And I can see, even especially if I listen to the old stuff now, I can see it, that it breaks at some time, that it doesn't work anymore for me at some time. So that was the basic idea about it. And yeah, it was this kind of hiding the person behind it a little bit. Nowadays, I mean, it's still the name for this thing, but I have my real name in there just as well. And I decided at some point, it's not right. I want to unify that all under my person. You know, when I started out, I had lots of different projects, and I was working in contemporary music, was composing music myself. I was as well doing this installation stuff with very burlesque and funny stuff in there. And then I was also playing in funk bands, and I was doing techno music, and I was doing jazz music. So it was all these different things. And I always thought, I can't do this as one person. I have to put names on there that speak for the project. And then at some point, it's just like you really realize, okay, no, it's all me. It's that's coming from me. And it's not that, I don't need the idea anymore that it's different persons doing this.
Yeah, okay.
Or it's interconnected in some way.
Yeah, let's go back to this very big question about the instrument. Very big question for me about the instrument, about the sound, at least. And let's talk about the modular systems you are designing in the digital scene. You say about this as a digital modular audio processing system. And also you are talking about this as a trying to find and define the sound. Let's divide this question into two. For me, it's the question more about producing the modular, producing the kind of the environment for producing sound. So they really depend on each other, the environment and the sound. And you talk about that you are find and you try to find and you try define your own sound. Let me ask you first, did you find it? And did you define it already or not?
Yes and no. Yes, it was true at that time that when I wrote that, I was very much involved in the development of that machine that I was talking about. And I can say after a few years, I can say I found this sound that I was looking for. But of course, you never are finished with anything, and time goes on. And mostly, I think it's attributed to just getting older, and getting tired of things and being interested in new things. So it's not really like this one spot there that I can see that I want to follow. It's more like walking in circles and stuff like that. So to some extent, I found it for this specific project, but in general, no, I haven't found it. It's like a continuum. It goes on and on and on. And I realized that long ago, so it's not surprising me. New things come up, new ideas come up. We meet new people, we read new books, we have new ideas. If this wouldn't be the case anymore, then it was probably time to stop all this.
Yeah, please tell us a little bit more about their project, like mutable instruments, and what you did out of this, like making something of this hard and putting it into the digital.
Actually, okay, yeah. Mutable Instruments is a Eurorack module developer from France, and the modules themselves are actually digital already, most of them. So Emily Gillet is the developer, and she was kind enough to put the source code of those modules, and they are very, very popular because they are good, they are well designed, decided to put the source code online, to open source the code that is running on that little modules. And I heard about that through students, actually. Some of my students came up with this Eurorack format and asked questions about it. And I knew that this existed, but I was not really so much interested in it at that time. And they showed me some of these modules, especially from Mutable Instruments. And I thought, well, okay, let's try it out. Let's see what it does. And yeah, it was interesting. And at some point, some student asked some very specific question about the inner workings of one of the modules. And then I found the source code, and I was able to understand what's going on and was able to explain it and to also transcode it into Max. And yeah, the rest was then my curiosity to find out how well or how easy it would be to make the code accessible for myself, for my own projects. And I mostly work still with the environment Max MSP, and I was actually then building objects for Max out of that code and made them open source again. So that is basically the idea. It was a fascination about the functionality of the modules, the sound, but it was also a huge curiosity if I would be able to do this and what would enable this to me.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's a difference. Now it's really just the software. It can be used inside of Max, which is nice because you can patch around it, just like you do with such a patching system like Max. But the hardware part of it, the knobs and the connectivity through the patch codes, of course, is not there anymore. So it is a bit of a different thing than the original.
Do you use it right now? I mean, do you still develop this idea of mutable instruments as a digital instrument? Or so do you still, if this idea is still working for you, or it's like already stopped?
It is still working for me, or there is still things to be done. I ported most of the modules that I find interesting or that I find suit well or work also well as just digital modules. I hardly have any time right now to do extra coding work. Schoolwork is really taking a lot of my time up right now. But it's always like that. If you want to open source something, if you want to give something back to the community, there is a huge overhead of work in trying to make it accessible and understandable for people how to use it. And this part there is still missing bits of it, the documentation mostly. So this is really taking a lot of time to create, but without that, people have difficulties using it. So it's always this thought, okay, should I open source that now? Should I put it somewhere? Then people will maybe use it. Okay, that's cool. But then the questions come back. Okay, this doesn't work, and how do I do this? And this creates even more work. So it's always like you have to think about if you want to put the time into supporting something also. And with these mutable stuff, well, there were a lot of people interested in that. So I made it open source again. And yeah, still there is missing some stuff. It's mostly documentation. I'll try to finish that very soon, but I don't know whether I have time to it.
Okay, let us share in your object you already did, because it's like in a public area, so we could share it. Yeah. Yes. You also like to work with the prepared instruments. I saw you're working with the prepared electro guitar, for example, and you do a lot. Can you please describe a little bit more about this? And also, how do you think? What are you doing with the instrument? If you change the instrument, means that you change the sound. Your approach in this connection between the instrument and the sound. Do you prefer to start with the instrument, or do you prefer to start with the sound?
I wouldn't say that there is a clear first I do that and then I do that. Just happens, I would say. I mean, as mainly electronic musician, I'm interested in sound in general, whether it comes from purely electronics or has an acoustic origin, doesn't really matter. And the idea with the guitar was basically I'm not a guitar player. So I'm a pianist, right? And at some point, when I improvised, I noticed that my fingers keep repeating certain patterns on the piano, on a keyboard, be it a piano, be it a synthesizer, whatever, a keyboard instrument, let's put it like that. And I couldn't get away from it. I wanted to have something different in there, something surprising, as I said before. And then I abandoned keyboard instruments from my repertoire. Even though I had the skill
like violin player, they almost all the time, contemporary violin player, they hate instruments and not preferring to write something for this. I mean, composers, they really like, okay, we want to break it and then start with something new.
Yeah, exactly. So I abandoned that and worked with the computer and interfaces and stuff like that. But I missed the tangibility and the directness of a real instrument in my setup. And I kind of compensated it to a certain part by using microphones and contact microphones, so tangible stuff. But the electronic or the electric guitar was interesting for me because there was no additional microphone needed. It just has a pickup in there. It's a magnetic pickup. That's even more interesting sound-wise. And you can directly interact with the strings. You can do stuff with the tuning. And you can throw a lot of objects on there. It's not easy to break. That's also good. And you have no problem picking up the sounds. There is no feedback problem and stuff like that. And it was directly tangible with your hands. And that was very attractive to me. So that is how I got in there. First, I would say there was more like software ideas. And then the idea with the guitar came in this project. I used it also, the guitar I use with this modular digital thing that I built. You mentioned it before. I could show it on the screen if you want to see that.
Yeah.
I can try to share the screen here. Okay, you should see a Max patch running now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is not important. I want to explain everything here. It's just the idea of all these boxes here. That is what I mean with modular.
Yeah.
I tried to set it up that I can stick stuff in there. Develop something new, put it in there, try it out, and if it doesn't fit, I can just go here and throw it out again, and it's gone. And so that is the system behind it. I have a way of designing these boxes here. Bring it back in. Yep. That it automatically works. And in this way, I can still extend the instrument while I already have rehearsing experience with it. So I play with this, I rehearse with it, and then I can add little stuff that changes little things and not the complete system. And so I was able to actually perform with the system and still extend it over a period of 8 or 9 years now.
Yeah, but does it mean what I really talked about, that you are more creating the environment than an instrument?
Call it environment, call it instrument. I don't really care so much for that. For me, it is a sort of instrument because it's not just the software, but it's also the controllers I use. So the muscle memory that I build up to play this thing. And this is quite important. I cannot just go there and exchange a controller, a MIDI controller, that has the faders in a different position, the knobs in a different position. Then I have to think again how to play this. And this is similar to an instrument then again. If you have the keyboard instrument and you're picking out or taking out certain keys or rearranging the keys, then you can't play it anymore without, while thinking, this is over here now, and this is here now. So in this respect, it is a kind of instrument. It is something that stays the same and is only changed slightly in there.
Mm-hmm. Tell us, please, a little bit about your solo album release, which calls Endless Undo. How it was produced, what was the initial idea? Did you also use this modular system to create the sounds? And what is behind? How do you combine everything? What was the general idea? Tell a little bit about this.
I did work exactly with this environment that you just saw. Yeah. All the sounds basically came from here. But I have to say, I work a lot with sampled sound also. So with little snippets of sound that I process with this modular system. So I treat them mostly the same as the guitar input or the contact microphone input.
So as if you have something that you put into, and then there is something happens with it inside.
Exactly, yes.
Like with the guitar. So the guitar is also a kind of interface and environment. So that's why I ask about this, how do you treat the instrument and the environment? Because guitar can be also the environment for something to be processed inside.
Of course, yes. But a lot of that is buffer based. So you record a certain amount of time and then you have something to work on. And now if this little audio snippet is already existent on your hard drive, or if you record it through a microphone, that doesn't make a big difference anymore. So for this album, I didn't plan to do an album at that time, actually. I was very busy working on this project and improving my improvisation skills and my solo improvisation set with this, the guitar, the modular thing, and trying to create really, I tried to define the sound that I want to do with this in an improvised manner. And then actually through SoundCloud, I think, I was contacted by somebody who was the label owner of this label. And he asked me if I would be interested to release something on his label. And I was pleased to hear that. And then I asked, okay, what kind of sounds were you thinking about? Because at that time I was already having several different stuff on this SoundCloud page, right? And then he named a few of those tracks. And at first I was a bit disappointed because he named tracks that were quite old already, and that were a lot based around more like danceable rhythms. And at that time, I was completely into free improvised stuff, not necessarily with straight beats. And then I sat down and thought, okay, what am I going to do? I have a chance to do a record now here with this label, but I don't want to do the old stuff, I don't want to go back to the old stuff. And so I decided to do something hybrid. And I started just recording this stuff. I was doing a lot of improvisations. All the record is actually done by improvisation, long improvisations. I recorded that directly into Reaper. Often I did multi-channel recordings, so I had the output of the single modules separately. and then started to edit that. So the album itself is initialized by interaction with the software. There are a lot of gestures in there. And for the gestures, I think I told you, I'm using mostly this graphic tablet with a pen, and
you could interact with your own improvisation.
Well, I use this for improvisation, basically. So it's an interface where I can very quickly play sounds with. And I'm using this with the software I just showed. And through the motion of your hands and the pressure and the angle you're pressing, you can all map these on parameters of the sound. So it's very direct. It's not exactly the same as having your fingers directly on the strings of the guitar, but it's a similar directness for any kinds of sounds. May they come from the guitar, or may they be pre-recorded, or maybe synthetic, or whatever. And
it's like a finger. It's like a finger of a pianist, which is touching the key with different pressure.
Exactly. There is a lot of training and rehearsing in there to get the exact feeling of the pen. It's very exact. That is very nice. It's not based on MIDI. It has a high resolution, and it's made for graphic artists basically, and they need this precision. And you can take that and use it in your music, and this is very nice. So it's a very precise instrument, although it is a bit clunky. You know, you have this pen in your hand, and sometimes during performance you might drop it, you know, and then if you're in action, this is a bit of a drawback, but basically I like the control of that thing. So a lot of gestures in there are recorded and then edit them basically. That's the main thing where the album came from. And I tried to do it. I tried to get into interesting beats. So I wanted to fulfill the wish of the producer of the label owner to have some kind of beats in there and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, what could I do today with the idea of having beats and still have an improvised session around it?
Yeah. Two extra questions. I understand that our time is almost done, but I want to ask you, please. I was very interested in your project you did as an interactive sound working at Klebeck in Basel, which calls Hi or Hey Guide, which is designed by you as a sound designer and also as the software programmer also. My question is this being between realities, as we talked about with Trickster, being between fiction and reality. How did you realize it in this project?
Yep. So the project lead is again by Sybil Howard. So she's the person I've been working on together with earlier also. And most of the software design was done by Thomas Resch, actually. He designed the whole engine in the background. I was in this project to develop the ideas and to do sound design and interaction design, exactly. The idea of a sound walk came from Sybil, and it is very closely connected to the location where we do this. It's at the harbor site here at the Rhine in Basel, and it's an interesting area where there's a lot of different things next to each other. There are little bars, there are open fields, there are a lot of people walking their dogs, then there are ships with coming.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So there are a lot of diverse field, and we wanted to do a sound walk that mixes exactly as you said, mix the perception, the reality that we have with augmented reality, we sometimes call this. So mix what you see and what you hear on top with stuff that we play back on the headphones. And we tried out different things, and we found most compelling the idea to have recordings made exactly in this area, but at completely different times of the year. It is open air, so in winter it behaves completely differently than in summer. In summer, for example, there are a lot of people there, hanging out there, drinking their beer, going to bars, having parties, as I said, jogging around, walking the dog, and all that is happening there. And in winter, it's much more quiet. And also during the day, it changes a lot. So the idea was to make binaural recordings. We had the in-ear microphones and walked around, recorded stuff, and to put those back on the headphones. And then that's the first break of reality, is that you walk in the same area, you hear the sounds that are just happening, but on top of that, you hear a recording of a different time at exactly that same area. So it is very convincing, because most of the sounds that you can hear are quite believable, but somehow it doesn't really match, right? Mm-hmm. One example is there is a ping pong table, and people just play ping pong there. So one of the examples is one of the recordings in there. We walked by there in summer where there was a party going on, people playing ping pong, laughing around and stuff like that. And then we put that back on the headphones for people to walk by there in autumn, when the actual start of the exhibition was. And through the GPS system, we could detect when the visitors were at which location. So if people walked past the ping pong table, which was still there, but no players around, we could play back the recording from that time. So you would walk there and you see the ping pong table, and suddenly you hear the sound of people playing there, and you hear the stories and the laughter. And this is we found this a very interesting thing to mix these realities. It's not completely artificial. It's just from another time. It's like a memory in there.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like overlapping of times of the past in the present and going into the future, because you could overlap them and use the same recording for the next time when another person comes at the other season. Yeah,
exactly. And of course, then extend the whole idea to we researched a bit about the history of that space, and then we deliberately put sounds in there that were passed long ago. There was, for example, there were big tanks, for example, of oil tanks, I think, still at that time. And we imagined stories then about that. There was, at some time, there was a big accident happening with a big fire there. And of course, we didn't record it at that time, but we kind of faked that to happen there, so that people walking by the tanks get a bit of the history of this place that happened there at some time, much further past. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of contents in there. Some of this completely imagined, some of this very real, like I said, recorded, but just at a different time of year, and some of those in between here. And the system tracks where people move along, and then knows, now the person is near this fence, for example. So, okay, now we can play with the sound from the fence, but without people actually touching it. And this was very interesting. And then there was some kind of... we also had a head tracker on there, so we know where people look at and can adjust the sound position in the room actually surrounding them. Normally, if you wear headphones, you have a stereo field here, and if you tilt your head, the stereo field moves with you, right? Yeah. And this is something that we wanted to overcome. So we wanted to have a stereo field that is somehow more real outside of you, so which stays here even if you tilt your head. The headphones, they tilt, But we wanted to have the soundstage stay like that. For this, we had to detect where the head movements and then correct the stereo image to make a movement against the one that you're doing, actually, so that the sounds actually stayed there. If you have a barking dog, virtual barking dog in front of you, and you tilt your head, you want the dog to stay there and not to jump around.
Yeah.
So like this, the mix of real sounds and the playback sounds was much more believable in the end.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. Thank you. At the very end, please tell me something a bit about your how your working stage looks like. I mean, when do you prefer to work in when you do something? Do you have your special workplace as something that's behind you, or you're working on a table, your work is sitting on a chair, or what? How? Because for me, it's very important. I like very nice the book by Giorgio Agamben, which calls The Portrait in the Cabinet. Because a philosopher is also a person who is describing his own portrait through the other persons. And the working stage, a working place becomes a kind of your working stage, which also very, very meaningful. Could you, if it would be possible, could you show something as the working place? Or maybe you would describe something very specific for you to work.
That's an interesting question, actually. And I would generally say that the working place or the situation I work in depends on what I'm working on. Yeah. So I have a prepared or a preferred way of working on most stuff that is mostly just this, a table, a computer in front of me, a second screen, loudspeakers. So I can do most of the stuff I want to do. Most of the programming stuff happens like that. But I very much enjoy working at different places, slightly different places. So I'm not getting too much comfortable with one thing or too much too much tricked into the situation that being always the same. So I have this room here, then I have my room in my apartment, which is slightly smaller. Well, mostly I need loudspeakers. Without loudspeakers, it's not possible, and a computer. This is what is always there. But I have several places where I can actually do this. And I found this to be very interesting because I tend to have different ideas at different locations. So
yeah.
I would
how your ideas depend on the locations.
Exactly. I would recommend everybody to change your places from time to time and see what comes, Yeah,
like to expect from the place something to surprise you as well, as from interface.
Exactly. And then, of course, it's the studio where I work every day, normally as a lecturer. But sometimes I also verify my mixes there, and then it's a completely different situation again. Everything is completely trimmed down to the only essential, loudspeakers and playback medium. And really to focus on only what's going on in sound. No other gear around like cables and keyboards and microphones, but just that. And then, you can see here on the right side, I have also investigated a little bit in the Eurorack stuff. So this is kind of different situation. It's not in front of the computer. It's away from the computer, which is very nice. Even if these are digital modules, many of them, they have their interface. It's designed. It's not my task to design it, to program it. I can connect it and listen to the sound. And this is something I found very refreshing from time to time, to have a completely different working situation. Also, these are portable, so I can take one of these to my apartment and do some stuff there. And yeah, as I said, it's worth it trying out different stuff and again being surprised by stuff. I feel I need to be challenged again and again by new stuff, by new inputs somehow, to again adapt to it and to find my position and my own ideas to the new situation.
If you would associate yourself with a tree, what it would be?
With a tree?
With a tree.
Oh God. I don't know. Actually, it's completely ambivalent. A very personal question, by the way. I don't know if I can say much about myself. I don't know who I am, actually. I tend to know exactly who I am as everybody, but then if I think about it, I don't know it. And so it's difficult to answer that. What kind of tree? I think I'm slow. So a tree is quite, is something that I can, the idea of a tree is pleasing me because it's growing slowly. It has these roots and stuff like that. But choosing which kind of tree, I don't know. Sorry.
Thank you, Volker. Thank you so much. I would really love our conversation, and yeah, I think that would be really nice to see it written. And I would be, yeah. We will edit. We will edit it a little bit later. So maybe we will recombine a little bit some parts of it together with everything. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your coming. Good luck with your projects, because I know you have a lot and still you are, I didn't ask you, but I can imagine how much you do as a professor with students and as head of the studio now and composer, let me call you like this. But I don't know. I understand that composer is not the same like sound designer or sound maker or whatever. Yeah, and yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olga. It was nice to talk to you, and hopefully it's not too mixed up, all these answers that I tried to give.
No. You're so full with ideas and so full with your feedbacks about your ideas. And even to me, it is a good material to think about the technology, because I think that it's not my heart being a technological too much. And with going deep into your creations, I feel like, okay, it's really like a question of learning a lot about this. Not even because learning is already creating, because learning means that I change something inside me to create in the other field. And thank you for this knowledge.
You're welcome. You're welcome. If you have any additional questions coming up later on, contact me by email or something like that, and we will sort it out.
Yes. Thank you so much.